Okay, so this meeting is being live streamed. And Ishan, can I start?
Yes, good to go.
Okay, just 1 second. Yes, okay, so I'm going to get started, guys. Today, we're going to discuss a topic that affects many people but is often misunderstood, right? And that's anxiety. We realize this term is thrown around very casually, very lightly, and of course, because we hear so much about it. But before we dive into unraveling the truths about it, I want to actually get down to understanding what anxiety is. I want to explain what anxiety is, perhaps in a very simplified manner, right? So for that, I'm going to use one of my favorite analogies, one of my favorite metaphors, rather, for anxiety, which is the backpack of worries. So imagine you're on a long journey through a beautiful but challenging mountainous trail. And as you begin your hike, you're carrying a backpack, right? And at first, that backpack feels light, and the scenery around you, it's breathtaking. You're excited, you're full of energy, you're eager to see what lies ahead, right? However, as you continue on that trail, you start to notice that the backpack is gradually becoming heavier, right? You look inside and realize along the way you've been picking up small stones, each perhaps representing a different worry, a different fear, a different sort of stress. Some stones are small and like concerns, perhaps regarding your day to day tasks, while others are larger, representing deeper anxieties, perhaps about the future, about your relationships, or even your sense of self. At first, you barely notice that extra weight, but as more and more stones accumulate, the backpack does, of course, become heavier. It becomes increasingly burdensome, and it slows you down. It makes the climb a lot steeper. It drains you of your energy. The beautiful scenery around you becomes harder to appreciate because the weight of that backpack pulls your focus downwards. The journey, which once felt exciting, it now just feels overwhelming. By this point, I'm sure you guys have figured out that the backpack I'm referring to is your anxiety. Just like the stones, anxiety is often made up of a collection of worries and fears that accumulate over time. Some are obvious, while others are so small, so salient, so subtle that you might not even realize you're carrying them. But together, they become a heavy burden that, sort of makes it difficult to move forward or even enjoy your journey. Essentially, that's what anxiety is. Understanding your anxiety, it's like recognizing that you are carrying this backpack. The symptoms may present for a very long time, but unless we actually address those symptoms, it's not really gonna we're not gonna make any progress, right? It's not just about acknowledging the weight, also. In fact, it's not about acknowledging the weight you feel, but also about taking the time to open the backpack, perhaps examine each stone, examine each fear, examine each worry, and decide whether you really need to carry it. Some stones might be necessary to keep, right? Like, of course, you in every strength of your being have every right to be concerned about your future, to be anxious about your future, right? Some are necessary to keep. I understand that, depending on priorities and everything, so on and so forth, situations, circumstances. Those that but those have to represent genuine concerns that need addressing. But others, some might be unnecessary, added out of perhaps habit or fear, and it can be a set down. So, by understanding what's in your backpack, you start to lighten your load. You might not be able to remove all the stones per se, but even lightening it is a way to get better, to simplify that, right? To make it more manageable. You might also realize that you don't have to carry the weight of that backpack alone. You know, it's others can help you through it or share that weight if it feels too heavy. We all know that this is easier said than done, right? But it's just a very simple metaphor to understand what anxiety is and how it accumulates, how it builds up, and how it reaches that point of distress, of dysfunction, right? I also want to talk about another metaphor before I really get into the scientific basis of it, because I'm sure the world knows what anxiety is. But Do they truly understand it? Is my biggest question. I personally don't think so. Anxiety is a very overwhelming feeling. It's sort of like an alarm clock, right? This is a famous metaphor most therapists refer to while explaining what anxiety is, while psychoeducating people on what anxiety is. An alarm clock is designed to wake us up or remind us of when it's time to do something. But today we're going to imagine it as a clock that is something way more fascinating, and that's anxiety. Think about it just like an alarm clock. Anxiety is your brain's way of getting your attention. It's there to alert you, it's there to warn you that something might need your focus or might need attention, might need action. Let's dig a little deeper here. Wait. Um, Imagine you're in a forest and suddenly you hear this rustling in the bushes or in the grass, and your brain doesn't know if it's perhaps, I don't know, a cute bunny or a hungry bear. So it triggers your anxiety. It's like ding, 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 just like that alarm, right? And your body gets ready to either fear the bear or fight it or run from it or freeze from it. There's so many ways you may cope with that sense of stress, that sense of anxiety. And you may do so in hope that yes, you will survive. That's survival mode. That's fight, flight, or freeze mode, right? That's survival mode. But what about when you're just living your normal life? Why does the alarm go off then? See, that's the tricky part. In today's world, we're not usually facing bears or wild animals, right? But our brains sometimes can't tell the difference between real danger and imagined threats. It might go off, that alarm in your brain might go off because if perhaps because of a big test, even a social situation, even something uncertain in the future, your brain sees these as potential threats and hits the alarm button. But what if that alarm button again like goes off too much, perhaps even all the time, right? We all know, I'm sure we all know of at least one person who does suffer from anxiety, who does experience symptoms of anxiety. And sometimes, unfortunately, there are situations where it happens all the time. You never know when to expect it, when not to expect it. That's when anxiety becomes a bit of a nuisance, right? It's like having an overly sensitive alarm clock that goes off every time a leaf falls on the roof. It means well, but it's reacting to things that may not necessarily be dangerous. When that happens, it's important to learn to settings how to adjust to settings as well as adjusting your own anxiety alarm, right? You may have to make certain changes around you, but you have to make a lot of changes within you. One way is perhaps by understanding what your anxiety is trying to tell you. Is it reminding you to prepare for something, or is it telling you to take a break? Perhaps a lot of times when people face burnout, they start feeling anxious, worn out, of course, but anxiety is another symptom that comes around. Is it a false alarm? By recognizing, your patterns, your triggers, you can start to tune the alarm to only go off when it's really needed. But again, what if now another question you may ask is, what if it's really loud and I can't turn it off? That's where coping strategies come in, right? Things like deep breathing, mindfulness, talking about your worries, expressing your concerns, um, and not just internalizing them. It can help quiet the alarm to some extent. Sometimes it's okay to ask for help. Um, like perhaps even it's like bringing a repair person in to fix your alarm, right? Therapists, counselors, psychiatrists, people working in the mental health field specialize in getting past this. Even your friends, though, your social support system, friends, family, they can all act as the right tools to manage your anxiety. So, to sum it up, anxiety is not all that bad. It's just trying to help you, even if it's a little overwhelming sometimes. It's all about understanding your anxiety and learning how to work with it rather than work against it. Remember, the goal here when we think of treating anxiety isn't to get rid of that alarm, it's to make sure it's working for you, not against you. So moving forward, of course, my analogies, I'm going to limit it to that. But as we all know, anxiety is a very natural response to stress. It's characterized by feelings of worry, by feelings of fear, apprehension. It becomes problematic when it becomes intense or persistent and interferes with your daily functioning, right? Like, of course, any of you who know me know that when I have to categorize something as a disorder, I look for two signs, the two Ds, distress and dysfunction. And anxiety in general would only become a disorder when it causes distress in one's daily life. anxiety can have an impact on your emotions, right? There may be excessive worry, irritability, but the physical symptoms also manifest in different ways. There could be rapid heartbeat, there could be sweating, there could be trembling. Some of the cognitive symptoms may include difficulty concentrating, racing thoughts. All in all, what I'm trying to say is anxiety is extremely overwhelming, and it's one of those disorders which makes sure its presence is felt. I'm not trying to trivialize other disorders here. Every disorder comes with its own tax on the body, its own toll on the person. But anxiety is one that is so intrusive because when your heart rate is that high, when you're sweating that much, after a point, it may not even be about your thoughts anymore because you're so overburdened physically by that feeling, right? So the impact of anxiety may, include interfering with work or school or social interactions. It may lead to physical health issues such as chronic fatigue, digestive issues. It could strain relationships, whether be it professional or personal, and especially self-esteem. This is one that I would want to speak about more specifically because self-esteem takes a hit. There's a lot of self-doubt, and you'll also notice that someone dealing with anxiety becomes very avoidant. They start engaging in avoidant behaviors to ensure they don't experience that feeling of anxiety. It's a way of dodging the trigger, right? But there are strategies which can be managed, which can be used to manage anxiety. Of course, the famous one is cognitive behavioral therapy, right? It includes, now, this is definitely every therapist's, I think, go to way of managing anxiety because it involves identifying and challenging negative thought patterns, right? So, a lot of times with anxiety, it's supposed to preserve your well-being, it's supposed to protect you. It starts out with that, right? It's like, okay, moving forward, I want to predict the worst case scenario because I want to be prepared for it. But at the same time, when that happens, it sort of goes, it's like we get ahead of ourselves. So anxiety gets ahead of itself. You start genuinely believing that the worst case scenario is actually taking place. And those are those thought patterns that we target in therapy. Another thing is exposing yourself to the one thing that makes you anxious, right? This is obviously done systematically, it's done gradually, but with time, when we actually have evidence that certain things may not actually have the impact that we anticipate, the anxieties automatically calm down. Of course, there are mindfulness and relaxation techniques. There's deep breathing exercises. There's JPM, or progressive muscle relaxation. There's mindfulness meditation. Sometimes it may even include lifestyle changes such as practicing healthy sleep habits, focusing a little more on sleep hygiene, perhaps some physical activity to blow off all that energy, all that steam from that you have generated with anxiety, right? It's like building a support system is one other thing that I want to talk about because I want to talk about the importance of social support here. It's a lot of times people feel very isolated, and I think this applies to not just anxiety, but a lot of mental health issues. When people undergo such experiences, they feel extremely isolated, right? That's why the importance of social support is so heavily emphasized on in the field because humans are social beings. Most of the time, we do need another shoulder to lean on, and it's just one of those things that helps ease our pain, right? But I understand there may be times when you can't access your social support system and perhaps may not even have one. That's when professionals can also come into the picture. There's therapists, there's counselors, there's psychiatrists. These, let's say, they specialize in managing all these symptoms. Moreover, I want to take a second to talk about the stigma surrounding mental health, which is what prevents one from seeking help. Anxiety is one of the most common mental health challenges people face today. It affects millions, yet the stigma around it can make it feel so lonely. It can make it, like I was saying, an isolating experience. Today, I want to talk about what this stigma looks like, why it exists, and most importantly, how we can work together to break it down. I want to start because I feel like this is so important to talk about because a lot of times anxiety has become so common, right? Be it anxiety, be it depression, the prevalence has increased so much with newer generations, but there's so much stigma that people aren't willing to reach out, aren't willing to seek help, and it's hindering the process of getting better, you know? Um, Before I move on, does anyone have any questions? No? Okay. So I want to start by asking anyone if they're comfortable answering, have if they've ever heard of statements which go like, it's all in your head, or just calm down when referring to anxiety. I'm sure we all at some point have heard this, right? Whether it's directly towards us or seeing it with someone else. Statements like these are all too common, and they reflect a deep misunderstanding of what anxiety really is. And anxiety is not just worrying too much, and it's certainly not doing something, and it's certainly not something you can switch off, you know? It's a real, often debilitating condition that affects the body and mind in such profound ways that sometimes it's such a deep rabbit hole that it's almost impossible to get out of it unless you get that extra support. Stigma around anxiety or even mental health in general creates barriers. It can prevent people from seeking help, from talking about their experiences, from feeling understood and supported. It can make someone feel ashamed of what they're going through, leading to further isolation and perhaps even the worsening of their symptoms. In the past, I've read so many studies which state that people who feel stigmatized are less likely to reach out for help. They may avoid therapy, they may avoid medication, or even opening up to friends and family. This delay in seeking help can actually make anxiety worse, turning what could have been a manageable situation into a much larger issue. So why does it exist, right? Part of it comes from a lack of understanding. Mental health is invisible. You can't see it the way you can see perhaps a broken leg or a physical injury. And because of this, many people underestimate the severity or the seriousness of anxiety and other mental health conditions. These misconceptions, like believing that anxiety is just about being weak or that people should simply snap out of it, are harmful and perpetuate the stigma, right? The truth is, anxiety is a complex condition with physiological as well as psychological components. It's not just about strength or willpower. It's literally about brain chemistry, about genetics, about life experiences, and sometimes it may even involve trauma. Breaking the stigma starts with education, with conversation, right? We have to talk more and more about it. And the more we openly talk about anxiety, the more we talk about our own experiences, the more we can challenge these harmful myths and replace them with understanding. That understanding will lead to compassion, so on and so forth, for both ourselves and others. Personally speaking, I've had my own struggles with anxiety for a very long time. And I didn't talk about it. I was very young. I didn't really have much of an understanding of the world. And it was a very isolating experience. And I was afraid of being judged. I was afraid of being seen as less capable, competent, and when I finally opened up, I found out that not only did people understand, but a lot of them could relate. A lot of them had their own stories to share. And it was a powerful reminder to me, which honestly strengthened my process as a psychologist. It was such a powerful reminder that I'm not alone, that there are the people going through this, there are the people who need help. But the silence has kept everyone so quiet that people are suffering internally, you know? Now, of course, what I'm about to share with you is it's a quick fix, it's a recommendation, but nothing will replace the value of actually going to a mental health professional, expressing your concerns, and being committed to the process, whether it's a psychiatrist, whether it's a psychologist, or whether it's a combination of both. Nothing will supersede that. But that being said, I understand in the moment anxiety can be very taxing on the body. So one of my go-to quick fixes, to say the least, is deep breathing. When we're anxious, our breathing tends to become shallow. It tends to become fast, which can make us feel even more panicked, right? In those situations, we could perhaps limit the amount of oxygen to bring down our heart rate. So deep breathing, also what it does is it calms our nervous system. It brings us to a more relaxed state. And that is the aim. So usually what I tell my clients to do is place one hand on their chest and the other on their stomach and slowly inhale through the nose and count to 4. They should really feel their abdomen expand. And, they hold that count for 4 and then they exhale, counting to 6 through their mouth. And I asked them to do this, a couple of times. And usually what they report feeling is soothed. They soothed. They can feel the tension go away. So this is another quick fix. Now, another famous one I would want to talk about is a grounding technique. Grounding techniques help bring your focus back to the present moment, especially when anxiety pulls you into worrying about the future or ruminating on the past. One popular technique to all the therapists out there, one popular technique is the 5 4 3 2 1 method. So it involves look around where you are and name 5 things you can see, then 4 things you can feel. Could be the texture of your clothes, the chair beneath you, you know. Uh, 3 things, yeah, it was 3 things you can hear. So you need to sort of activate your senses and name 3 things you can hear. Next, name 2 things you can smell. And if there's nothing noticeable, you can simply think of your favorite scents. Finally, name 1 thing you can taste. It could be the lingering, flavor of your mouth, or you can think of your favorite food. But this technique, it's so simple and it's incredibly effective at the same time. It pulls you out of your anxious thought and back in the present moment. That's the whole concept of grounding, right? It's all about activating your senses so your mental processes take a back seat for that moment. And in my opinion, it's helped me focus so many times. My mind often tends to race off, but I tend to feel more grounded after doing this. Usually, and this is often done in therapy, but we challenge negative thoughts. Anxiety often comes with a flood of negative thoughts. What if this were to happen? What if I fail? What if, the future is looking bleak or this doesn't work out? These thoughts, they start out small, but they tend to spiral out of control if we don't challenge them. One way to do this is by asking yourself, what evidence do you actually have for this thought? Or what evidence do you have against it? Right? And in a situation where it's all based on feelings, we need to rely on evidence. We need to rely on proof. So, perhaps you can do is think of something you've had to worry about lately and ask yourself, is this worry based on facts? Or is it just a what if? So, challenging negative thoughts is another one. Progressive muscle relaxation, another famous one. This technique involves, tensing and relaxing your muscle groups rather, in your body. So it helps release physical tension, which often accompanies anxiety. A lot of times, what I remember doing is really stiffening up my face and then letting it go. So I do that for a prolonged period of time, and it honestly works wonders. But so that sort of covers the quick fix techniques that I employ when I feel anxious. I recently watched a movie called Inside Out 2, which is an animation, but it does such a beautiful job at explaining what anxiety really is. And that the intent of anxiety, if anxiety were to be a character in our lives, the intention is good, but very often it's misunderstood. It's protective, but it also comes in the way of things. Sometimes it tends to take over a lot. And it was just so beautifully put. I mean, regardless of your age, I would 100% recommend watching that movie to understand anxiety perhaps a little better. So I'm going to open the floor for questions now. Does anyone have any comments or anything to share, perhaps a personal story or any questions? I'd be happy to take them.
Firstly, thank you, Sarah, for using such great analogies to explain what anxiety is. That has really helped me out in getting a better grasp at it. And secondly, I had a question because I have been pondering upon this for a really long time. Do you think imposter syndrome could cause anxiety or it could lead to anxiety or vice versa?
Quite possibly.
Because I've been feeling it for quite some time now, and I think I wouldn't call it anxiety, but I would say that it's leading to anxious thoughts. So maybe if you could like help me out there.
Can you tell me a little more about that if you're comfortable sharing that here?
Yeah, so I think I've had imposter syndrome for a really long time, like since school days itself. But now I feel that I've been very anxious regarding it as well. I've had very doubts. I've had a lot of self doubts because of it. So I guess just that.
Okay, so my assumption would be you're feeling that way because you're just starting out with your career. not sure if you've made any right choices. A lot of times therapists tend to have these questions in their head, but at the same time, you want that's a thought. We're gonna let a thought remain a thought, right? But I want to ask you something. Would you have made it this far, or would you have even landed a job had you not been competent for it? I'm just trying to look for proof.
Makes sense. It does make sense. And yeah,
I'm just trying to challenge the thought that you're having. It's an example. Of course, this would be a very long drawn conversation in therapy. But essentially, what I would do if I were in your case, if I were in your situation, were to challenge those thoughts, really know if they're valid or not. Because to some extent, someone may feel like, they're, like you said, the imposter syndrome. It's very real. It's a very real feeling. But at the same time, we have to look for instances to back that thought up. And usually, most times, there aren't enough instances or there isn't enough proof, which makes one realize that it is a thought.
yeah, definitely. So basically, what you're suggesting is that I should be challenging my thoughts first.
Absolutely.
Sure. Thank
Because
you so much.
as far as I know, your knowledge on the subject is quite vast.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm just like trying to get a better grasp of it so that I can also help out people who are reaching out to me for the same.
Mhm.
Thank you. It was really
And
helpful.
and that honestly, it's quite interesting a phenomena. But they say every therapist has something very personal for which they get invested in, um, the field per se. And they have to have experienced something. They have to have had been through something to want to get into the field altogether. So this could perhaps be it. This self-doubt could have actually given strength to your drive to become a therapist also.
Definitely. I've even heard that in order to be a better therapist, you need to have a lot of experiences. Yeah,
Absolutely. That's how you build compassion. That's how you build empathy, right?
definitely.
Mm.
Thank you, Sahar.
Thank you, Nisha. Anyone else? Okay. So I think that would be it since there's no other questions or no other comments. So thank you everyone for Wellness Wednesday. It was lovely being able to address the matter, to address the topic. I loved talking about it. Thank you, Mehak. I will see you guys next week, next Wednesday, with another very interesting topic. So I look forward to that. Okay. Thank you, everyone. Bye bye.